Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Financial Inclusion Week, an exciting session on building banking infrastructure for refugees. We're going to keep it a really casual session, and so please put questions in the chat, anything you want our speakers to address, fun and exciting things you're working on as well. We're missing one speaker now, Shafi from Ugafode, but hopefully he'll be able to join anytime soon. My guess is he's very busy getting bank accounts for refugees as we speak. But I'm going to turn it over to my panelists in a minute and have them introduce ourselves, and then I'll ask a few questions while I wait for some great conversation in the chat. So first, I guess I should introduce myself. So I'm Barry Shorey. I run the Refugees and Disaster Initiative for the Hilton Foundation, which focuses on 4 countries: Uganda, Ethiopia, Colombia, Ecuador, and looking at how to support refugee livelihoods and as well as children's access to early childhood development. And so a key component of that, of course, is financial inclusion and access to financial services, and how important it is for refugees to have bank accounts in order to fully integrate into their new countries. I'm going to turn it over to David. Would love to hear a little bit about your background and yourself. So go for it, David.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you everyone for joining on this session too, and for the invitation to be a panelist in this session. My name is David Licheri. I'm a director and co-founder of Equilibrium. Equilibrium is a research development firm that focuses on gathering data in Latin America for the public sector and also international cooperation sector. And we've been working for the past 5 years in many projects regarding Venezuela migration in the whole region, in countries like Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, Central America, also in Costa Rica, Panama, and the Caribbean, in Dominican Republic mostly. Most of the research we've been doing is about socioeconomic integration and how financial inclusion can foster this integration of migrants in the whole region. So yeah, happy to share with you some of the knowledge we've been gathering for the past years.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Nico, over to you.
Thank you so much, Barry and David, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone joining the session. I'm Nicholas Lafay. I'm Senior Director of Investments at Kiva. I've been with Kiva for about 15 years now in a variety of roles, but always focused on our investment work and our mission to broaden financial inclusion globally. As some of you may know, Kiva is a crowdfunding platform that channels capital through to financial service providers, thanks to our network of retail lenders. My involvement in refugee lending really grew out of Kiva's role in providing that risk-tolerant capital through our platform. The flexibility that our crowdfunding platform provides allows financial institutions and entrepreneurs to basically design and test new loan products that respond to market realities and ultimately better serve people who are typically and often excluded from traditional finance. Back in 2016, our Middle East investment manager, Lev Plavez, started exploring opportunities with local microfinance institutions to serve refugees and displaced populations. At the time, there was actually a strong perception that these clients were too risky. Still is a strong perception, but we are trying to break that a little bit, that perception. So we launched a pilot lending program that has since grown far beyond the Middle East and reached over 40,000 refugees. That work eventually led to the creation of Kiva Capital, our asset management arm that allows institutional investors to participate through vehicles like the Kiva Refugee Investment Fund. So today, that's where I'm at. I oversee our work with our funds, including the Kiva Refugee Investment Fund, and I continue to focus on how we can help financial service providers scale their impact with refugees and displaced populations.
Great. We're going to come back to Kiva for the Kiva Refugee Investment Fund in a minute, but David, I wonder if I can start with you and just ask, what are some of the trends you're seeing in the sort of refugee financial inclusion space? And what do you think is, a few things that are working really well and a few things that aren't working really well for refugees accessing banking systems and financial inclusion?
Great. Yeah, I think as Nicholas mentioned, most of the financial ecosystem has always perceived refugees or people in displacement as a very highly risk population. You don't have guarantees. You don't have a social network to rely on when you give a financial product. You don't have sometimes a steady income. So at this point, I would say that, well, at least in Latin America, about 5 or 6 years ago, refugees were just not an interesting target for any financial institution. In the past 4 to 5 years, this has evolved, and I would say now it's mostly very interesting to micro lenders. And in the terms of micro lenders that have actually gathered some minimum amount of customers, taking into account this population that has not been covered by the traditional banking system. And that's where I see a trend and opportunity where it has been very successful on microlenders working on it. And also that microcredits in many cases have showed to be a very good use case for the first financial product of a refugee itself.
Right.
Of course, you need to have other metrics in the terms of risk assessment that are not the traditional ones. So you have to get to know the person more. You have to be involved within the refugees ecosystem and all the network effects they have so you can leverage that and mitigate the risk. But we can see, for example, companies like Migrante or Galgo, which is a fintech that lends mostly to refugees and migrants. They actually grew only with this target population. So you can actually see that has been successful businesses that have been growing along in the past years. This has been working very well, and we've seen a trend that the difference when the lending is given with technical assistance and actually workshops and actually getting to know the person better works way better than just giving the money and waiting for the payments to come back. And in that cases, foundations and the international cooperation have had a key role in actually supporting all these micro lenders to give this technical assistance. So yeah, I would say that's the trend. And with technical assistance, the most successful way for this first step of financial inclusion in refugee people.
Fantastic. So I mean, the upward trend of more interest in seeing refugees as a potential customer base for financial institutions, great. The piece around technical assistance being key, and then that sort of space of micro lending where it's staying. Nico, just on that, I think number one, I'm so glad you described the Kiva Refugee Investment Facility model. And I think part of where we're trying to move in the refugee space more generally is as aid cuts continue to happen, and so much of the refugee system is reliant on grant money. And I think KRIF is really trying, along with David and his team, trying to solve the problem of this real sustainability of efforts for refugees to be banked and for refugees to sort of integrate into the economy. So I'd be curious just to talk about the vision for KRIF as this sustainable model, as demonstrating impact, and then what's sort of the commercial viability of KRIF going forward, and what is that? I just learning more a little bit about that sustainability piece and that idea that, grants can only take you so far. They're important for technical assistance, but how are you guys building in this commercial viability and that we can move past what limited resources are available in this sort of grant space? Yeah.
It's an excellent question, Barry. And I think that was something that we were trying to prove back in 2016 when we started lending to refugees through our crowdfunding platform. Now, the good thing about Kiva is that we have a really strong network of retail lenders who trust us in our ability to deploy capital where we think it's most impactful. And so we started that lending to refugees, helping as well financial service providers starting in the Middle East to kind of navigate through the landscape of what displaced populations look like, what the market realities were, what their needs were. I do want to start with the first caveat. Lending is not necessarily the first solution to kind of financially including these populations. We need to think broader picture.
Super good point.
In some cases, like for instance, Colombia and Ecuador, we're seeing institutions starting to target refugees or displaced population through financial literacy trainings or savings products, right? Which is probably the first step before starting to lend to refugees. Once we got to that stage, we saw that the perception of the risk perception that these population has was non-founded. Like they repaid as well as any existing microfinance client. Our repayment rate for refugees on Kiva was 97%. Building that track record afterwards convinced commercial lenders that this was actually sustainable. So that was really the first step in our history in trying to serve refugees, but proving as well that it is a sustainable business model. So perception of risk, which was eliminated through a track record that we built on our platform, that allowed us to launch our first traditional investment vehicle. The second thing in improving sustainability, obviously, if you're an institutional investor, is return expectations. While the impact of our work is clear, institutional investors also want to ensure that these investments are sustainable and offer some level of financial return. To make our value proposition a little bit more attractive, we explored different fund structures and ultimately adopted a blended finance model, like bringing together private and public capital to offer different return profiles that appeal to a broader range of investors. So this is, again, how we made that value proposition appealing. It's not only sustainable, but it also provides a return. And then you mentioned something around grants. I think this is something that a lot of commercial investors would like to see on top of providing capital. It's not a must-have, but it's a nice to have in that investors increasingly want to see their capital catalyze lasting change. So with that in mind, in the Kiva Refugee Investment Fund, we incorporated technical assistance into that approach, supporting investees as they begin lending to refugees, or in the case of Yugafode, develop new infrastructure to better serve refugees, or even carry out market research to better understand outcomes and help these investees refine their products to refugees. So it's really about a combination of investment and capacity building that has been key, ensuring like both impact but also sustainability.
And then are you seeing sort of commercial capital in this space? Like are things, because I know you did a first fund, like what's going on with that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we explored the blended finance structure for that fund, and that groups a lot of different types of investors, from family offices, foundations. Those are a little bit more kind of risk takers, and so at that point, we offered them a slightly higher return. They were a membership interest into the fund structure that we've established, and then you have other more kind of public sector companies such as DFIs. So, for instance, the DFC was a major investor in the first fund, and so obviously a little more risk averse, but then from an interest perspective, a return profile seeking a little less return. That structure made it work for us to start scaling kind of the impact and the work that we were doing with refugees. That is to say, we didn't necessarily abandon what we were doing on the Kiva crowdfunding platform, but as I mentioned, the type of investors that we have there are retail lenders, and so they're small amounts, small capital amounts. They're still going to the same types of investees that we're working with, but that refugee fund allowed us to really duplicate the impact that we were having.
Okay, great. And in full disclosure, myself at Hilton is one of the the investors that does that risk capital, and I think that's an incredible role that philanthropy can play for sustainability. Is offering for us, we offer first loss and low interest rates, long repayment rates that allow investors like DFIs and others with higher standards to come in as well. So super important. David, there's one quick question in the chat just about the fintechs that focus on refugee populations that you mentioned, Migrante, and what was the other one?
Oh yeah, that actually I said Migrante. Now the current name is Galgo. They changed their name because they grew through financial products for migrants, and then now they are targeting other populations. So they changed the name just as a marketing strategy, not only to focus on refugees and migrants. And you also have, for example, Sinly. Sinly is a digital wallet that has been working very well throughout the region, based in Panama, mostly for Venezuelans, for cash transfers. You also have Rivo. It's also a micro-lending firm based in Peru. Redo is focused on migrants in Spain. Uno Crédito is also based in Peru. Those are the main ones in top of my mind. Perfect.
I'm sure that's super helpful for the folks on the line. I think making these links and connections, there's so so many people doing good work in this space, and it's access to information is also a problem as well, right? So there's a lot of microfinance and microcredit institutions willing to lend to refugees, but without that information. David, on the point that both of you have made, which is extremely important, is the role of technical assistance and the importance of technical assistance. David, as a technical assistance provider, could you give us like an example of what that looks like? What does some of your work with that? Why is that so important? And I'm going to ask a double question to this too, because there's a very important question in the chat around why are we pulling out refugees as a specific population when, Nico, you pointed out their repayment rates are often higher than others, and sort of what are we doing a little discrimination work within that? And so I think, David, if you could sort of blend in why this technical assistance is important for refugee access and what that includes, I think that might answer some of those questions. And Nico and I can answer that question too, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. I would say, well, the first and most important thing to consider is that we're not talking about a bilateral ecosystem where you only have the lending institution and then you have the person who receives the credit, but it's a multi-stakeholder space that it starts when we are talking about refugees with the ID that is being issued by the government to recognize that person as a human being living in the country. So, for example, we had one huge issue in Peru that the migrants and refugees document had one extra digit. And because of that, they were not able to open any financial products in the traditional banking for the first 2 years. And to change that, they had to pass a decree through the banking superintendents, so commercial banks could change and allow this extra digit and also the whole IT infrastructure. So it's only, let's say, that the status quo in terms of how the government is issuing IDs for these people, it makes it already harder for them to access to the product. Then you also have that within the financial institutions, you have different stakeholders at different levels, and sometimes you have the let's say the general managers of the bank that understand that this kind of document or this kind of population are eligible for credits and financial products. But we found doing mystery shoppers with refugees that sometimes when they ask the security guard at the entrance of the bank, they were not allowed to get in because they say, no, sorry, if you're not a Colombian, you won't be able to have a financial product. So and what I mean with this is that taking this multi-actor ecosystem into account, the technical assistant has to be multi-actor too. It's not only about talking with the person and helping them, but also giving advisory to the financial institutions, or even giving advisory work we work with the government itself and the migrations institutions to foster this financial inclusion. The other thing is that we've learned that we have to recognize the refugee as an economical actor that has a voice and has actually, it's not only a beneficiary. So in this case, when we do this, we involve the private sector and these SMEs and independent refugees that are trying to access to financial products in the discussion, then it's way more productive, the solution that we've got. We do through workshops. It's a good use case, through new communication ways for them to understand how to get access to credits. Through I would say those are the two most important ones we've worked to. So communication with them on how to get to the refugee population, and the second one, how in the local legislation these financial products actually work.
Amazing. So you did, David, you integrated what you're doing in technical assistance and some of the reasons why it has, we sort of have to build different models in banking services for refugees. I think the ID point that you make, the specific policies of a country, around regulations and KYC. I think even just something as small as, security guards opening the space, or even refugees knowing where to access banking or if they can. And so I think while the point in the chat is dead on that there should be this sort of non-discrimination, there are certain elements to a refugee life and policies and practices within banking and the government that make it necessary to design specific products and services, and also, mitigate some of those risks, perceived or real, doesn't matter, they're still there. And so we have Shafi on, who looks like he might be on his phone. I think we're having some laptop issues. So thank you for your commitment, Shafi, to get on this line. So I would love, and this is actually a good segue, I would love for you to introduce yourself, Shafi, and your work. And then maybe just talk about, some of the things that you've been doing in the refugee space, and maybe some of the challenges or successes you've had within that space.
Thank you very much. Sorry for having challenges
No
logging
worries.
in. So I had to switch on to the phone. I'm Shafi Nambovi, the Chief Executive Officer for UGAFORD. And when we talk about the financial inclusion for refugees, that is an area that is really very interesting for us at UGAFORD. We started it in 2019. And when we opened our first branch, COVID hit just after 1 week. But the journey has been interesting, was been full of lobbying, especially for policy changes, both at the institutional level and also at the regulatory level, and also at the government level, and also in terms of KYC. So UGAFORD, this has been really a very good journey. But we're happy that our challenges, we pass through the challenges, and these challenges have become lessons learned, and several other financial institutions are riding on the lessons that UGAFORD went through. So we are really excited that it's gaining momentum, and is also one of the key government initiatives to make sure that the financial inclusion for refugees is the key area, subject matter across all the sectors. I submit for now.
Great. And Shafi, I wonder if you could I think David and Nico have made such good points about the ecosystem. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about some of your work with Kiva and how they've been supporting you, and what that's looked like for your lending. So maybe just a bit about your relationship would be really interesting for folks.
Thanks so much. Kiva relationship has been too long. And I can also say that they were very instrumental in us studying this journey. One is that as a regulated financial institution, when we wrote to Bank of Uganda and asked them that we want to start lending to refugees, and the response we got from Bank of Uganda was, how are you going to cover the credit risk? I'm happy that Kiva believed in us, and they wrote to us a commitment letter that we submitted to Bank of Uganda. And from there, Bank of Uganda allowed us to start pilot testing financial inclusion for refugees. And then after, we wrote to them a letter to roll out, and that's why the journey is. So Kiva has been very instrumental. We upload loans on the cloud, and then they are funded. And what we can say is that the portfolio at risk for loans for refugees, specifically, it is the PAR 30 is at 4%, which is also the PAR 30 for the institution. So we don't see any differences in terms of that the credit default rates are more or less the same. And I think even from Kiva side, they can testify that the loans that they are being funded under Kiva, they are being paid. And when the COVID came in, Kiva also gave us the 500,000 USA dollars as the COVID relief fund, and we can say that that money was used and we fully paid back to Kiva. So Kiva is really a very great partner, and of course they also continue to expand to see that the other financial institutions can also be able to benefit, because Yuga for the alone cannot be able to meet all the market demands. Submit.
Thanks, Shafi. Nico, anything to add to that? Again, also how you work within the ecosystem to support folks like Yugafode? Yeah, any other more specific anecdotes or things like that?
No, and thank you, Shafi, for the praise. I think you deserve more of that because you're actually working with the refugees. We're only, I want to say, in the business of channeling capital onto financial service providers such as you. Barry, to your question, I think a couple of things. Understanding the market realities first is crucial for us, especially in our work serving refugees. We never initiated the conversation. We always look to our financial service providers to tell us what are some of the populations that they want to serve, but they think they're too risky, or they don't have necessarily the resources or the capital to start a lending program. And so this is the example that we've done with Shafi and Yugafode is there was a market reality there. They've designed a loan product and we provided capital to start that lending program. Now, it's true that one of the benefits of Kiva, again, our retail lenders are very risk tolerant. So the credit risk is borne by our lenders. And so that helps us prove a track record. And as Shafi mentioned, the risk profile of refugees is the same as the clients of his organization. So it's pretty much what helped us kind of launch KRIF. The second thing on top of market realities is ecosystem. It's crucial. Both David and Shafi alluded to that. We cannot be a single mover in that space. We need to connect with a lot of organizations who are already doing great work in that space. And sometimes it has to start at the highest level. From a regulatory standpoint, KYC is crucial for financial institutions to be able to start lending. So that's why I caveated earlier on, if you can't do lending, there's other form of services that you can provide. But obviously, if you want to get to lending, having some form of ID card is crucial. For instance, we'd love to start lending to refugees in Kenya. This is something that we've been trying to advocate at higher levels so that refugees are provided some form of ID so that financial service providers feel comfortable starting lending to them. So we've seen that, for instance, happen in Uganda. We've seen this happen in Colombia. Peru seems to be a great example of what can be done. Ecuador decided to regularize a lot of refugees so that they would be getting those ID cards, and then financial service providers can start either providing savings products or loans to them. So I think ecosystem building is a critical part of lending to refugees as well.
Great. A great question from Maddie in the chat. So, I think you've all sort of emphasized and especially ecosystems are different in every country. Regulations are different in every country. What refugees can access are different in every country. So, but thoughts on and David, I'll send this to you first, just given the nature of your work, but how can you apply and scale learnings from one market to another? So any examples you guys have of learnings in one country that have then influenced another, or even, and Shafi, this could be to you too, after David and Nico go, one bank to another, I think. So, and what are you guys thinking about in terms of the scaling those learnings? Yeah. I'll go David first, then I can go to Nico.
Okay, great. It is true that the refugee contexts are specific, because also the costs of being refugees around the world are also very specific in terms of why people have to go to other countries. Yep. But I do think that there are some key points or transversal learnings that we always can use for these cases. The first one, and we've seen that there can be a very active role from the private sector into into fostering policy for inclusion of refugees and migrants. So I would say that the ID, the identification, and this is a minimum requirement. So actually, a bank can offer financial products to a refugee. So being very active in that space. The second one is to acknowledge and that the metrics for financial inclusion and the metrics that you can use for refugees are not the traditional ones. Probably like, okay, do you have a guarantee, or do you have a family member that it can be a guarant for you? So these kind of cases are different. And maybe the first products, and I think Nicholas said it, maybe the first products are not lending. We have to use another kind of products than to get for them to grow within the financial institution. And the other one is that like looking for long-term solutions and not only for the quick wins. And maybe one of the questions that I saw in the chat about the ID, for example, there were special IDs issued for Venezuelan migrants in Peru within the special regularization program, which was a really good effort. But the ID was different than all other IDs in the country. So trying to look for the solutions that are long-term, have in the long term way better benefits than thinking about the quick wins that you might get, and then after 1 year, after 2 years, you'll have another new issue that you have to try to solve.
Super helpful. Nico, anything to add to that on sort of one market to another learnings that could help?
We're all about sharing learnings. That's the first comment I want to say. Like, this is not proprietary information. Anything that we can help the sector serve more refugees, we'll offer it. We're a funder, so if any funder out there wants to do that, we're happy to share our learnings, that's for sure. Now, I have to agree that is just not one solution fits all. What currently is working in Jordan is different than what's working in Uganda, then it's different than what's working in Colombia. Once you figure out market realities, there's different ways to serve refugees, as I've mentioned, like several stages. But even when you get to lending, there's different lending methodologies that work. In Jordan, it's about group lending. And David mentioned Galgo. They've built an algorithm to underwrite refugees. And so they're using tech to basically fine-tune their lending model. As I've mentioned, Colombia, they're not ready yet. They've started, but they've went through financial literacy, then savings, and then they've adopted their existing products to start lending to refugees. But again, I do want to say Galgo is, I would say, the exception to that rule. Lending to refugees is not necessarily rocket science. You do not have to invent a very specific product that nobody knows about. Again, as I said, in Jordan, group lending was very effective, and what they did is just incorporate a refugee into a traditional group without tweaking anything else. It just worked. So what works for you in your context might be very specific, but again, we're very happy to share those learnings as well.
Wonderful. So everyone holler at Nico for some learnings. Shafi, to that end, I'd be curious, you were saying in Uganda, you were, I think, one of the first to lend to refugees, and that you've since seen others come on board. So for you, what are sort of the two key things that you would share with folks like you, with banks and MFIs looking to go into the refugee space? What are sort of what's your best advice to your other comrades in arms over there?
Thanks so much, Barry. Of course, the advice is that they need to look at the refugee, not the word refugee, but as like any normal customer. And they need to follow through. If they want to lend them money, they need to follow through the normal loan appraisal process. Does this client have money in terms of cash flow? Because the world over we have been talking about the collateral, but collateral does not pay the loans. So what pays the loan is the business cash flow. So that is the first step. And then the other step is the financial literacy is very necessary, because there's that mindset change, because as you come to give out this money, which is a loan, they need to know that it has to be paid back. So they need separate grant funding from commercial lending, which is a business, because as a financial institution, you need to go there when there's a business case, not when there's someone out there that is giving you a grant funding to start. I'll give an example as the Yuga Fort. Initially, we had grant funding, and then the grant funding ended. So do we close business? So something that we have done at Yuga Fort is to integrate financial inclusion for refugees in our strategic planning, in our business processes, in our policies and procedures as a business, like any other customer that we are lending money to. I submit.
Shafi, that's awesome. You also answered some questions around sustainability we talked about a little bit at the beginning. So super useful to hear what you guys are doing. We have about 10 minutes left. I have one question to wrap up, but I was wondering, Nico, Shafi, David, do you have any questions for each other? I know you guys all work together quite closely, and you all have different hats in this ecosystem that we've been talking so much about. So I'm opening it up if you want to ask each other any questions.
Thanks so much. My question goes to my colleagues in Kenya. We have had several sharing sessions in terms of what is happening in Uganda, where we had the government in Kenya also in participating. It would be good to hear from our Kenya colleagues as to whether government is taking any steps to look at the model that is happening. For example, the Refugee Act that is in Uganda, compare it with what is in Kenya, and then to see that the financial inclusion for refugees can be flexible in Kenya as well.
Great. If there's any Kenyan financial inclusion folks on the line, would love to hear how some of the Sharika plan is going, slow and steady, I'm sure, on the financial inclusion side. So please jump in the chat. Nico, it looked like you were coming off mute. You got a question. Great.
I have actually a question for you, Shafi. So you've successfully developed a lending program, and you are ready to be at that stage where you're like, all right, refugee clients need some form of capital for their businesses. One of the many questions that financial service providers out there might have is, if they get to that stage, what is your recommendation from a collateral standpoint? A lot of financial service providers out there typically underwrite clients and request some form of collateral to make sure that the risk is mitigated, the risk of non-payment. So I'm curious to know how YugaFood managed to solve for that challenge.
Thank you very much. Of course, one is one of the key measures that we are undertaking is to lend through village savings and loan schemes, whereby the members know each other and they decide whom to give a loan to and how much, and they look at it as their own. So initially we started the normal group lending, but that didn't work because of the cultural differences. And then it is ourselves that we are forming the groups. We are telling people, please, since you don't have collateral, can you form a group and then we lend to you? But they don't know each other, and then they don't have an attachment to the group. And then, of course, different partnerships. We need to explore if there are any guarantee funding mechanisms. For example, like on the issue of the smallholder farmers, we have partnered with the one financial institution called the ABI Finance that is able to provide some credit guarantee, not 100%, but a certain percentage. And then, of course, depending on the institutional risk appetites in terms of what risk is it able to take. But like I mentioned about the collateral, we have some loan amounts. Up to certain loan amounts, we don't require collateral, but we can just take a collateral substitute, like looking at the stock that the customer has in the business. It acts as collateral, And then we're also looking at the guarantee mechanisms. And then, of course, shorter term loans. And I can also mention that the issue of credit reference bureau reporting, I think that is also creating some behavioral change. We have seen that, for example, in Uganda, we have the mobile banking where the telecoms are lending, but
Yep.
now they have now joined the credit reference bureau. So we are seeing that people are paying even those smaller loans as low as $10, which they are defaulted because they know that if you default, you may not access any credit from any other financial institution.
That's awesome, Shafi. Those were really concrete examples of getting around the guarantee. Okay, we're 5 minutes out, so I'm gonna end. I'd love to end with this question just to hear from you all. I'll start with David first. What's like your most exciting accomplishment? When I say you, I mean you and your organization. You know, I'm not. We all won't take the credit. What's your most exciting accomplishment or the sort of coolest thing that you've done that you want to share in the financial inclusion for refugee space? I'll give you, David, you. Yep.
I'd say, as I mentioned at the start, we are a research firm, so we help to implement projects. We don't implement it ourselves. We have an ongoing study. Actually, it's together with Kiva that I find really interesting. That they've decided to do a longitudinal study on refugees that have received loans. And I think that we have to we don't have to forget that actually the loans enable other things. They have very positive externalities. Maybe this person will have a better income, will be able to get a house, will be able to get a vehicle that allows them to get a better job or to get a better education. And like taking a look what would have happened to this population if they wouldn't have had this credit option after 3 or 4 years, it might be game changers. So actually having evidence of this and showing this to the stakeholder ecosystem might be like this small a small piece that helps scale all these initiatives that we're all working on financial inclusion for refugees. So
I couldn't agree with you more. As being a part of the ecosystem that doesn't do any implementation, but is a donor, all my colleagues speak about is, well, what's the evidence that this will have an impact? And so I know we are supporter, Hilton's a supporter of the longitudinal study. And for that reason, what can we do to amplify what works and bring others along for the resources for it? Nico, over to you. Coolest, fun, most exciting accomplishment in the space so far?
I think I would say the Kiva Refugee Investment Fund, but by far this allowed us to deploy $60 million of capital to refugees. That's double the impact, almost like double the impact that we've had on our crowdfunding platform. But I have to say, I have to thank our lenders for that, our staunchest supporters since the beginning. They've allowed us to be an innovative organization, to test products that allowed us to approve that refugee lending is actually sustainable and then launch KRIF. So that's my thanks to them. And then proud as well to be working with organizations like Yugafolk. They're the true risk takers. They're the ones who have said to a lot of other financial service providers, it can be done. So my thanks to them as well, and exciting to be working with them.
Yeah, I think I want to thank you guys for taking the time on all these amidst everything going on in the world. And thanks to Shafi, who through technical issues still managed to bring gems of insight into this conversation. So we appreciate it, Safi. And I just want to, I think all of our contact information is on the swap cards. I would highly recommend all of you who are interested in the financial inclusion space for refugees to reach out to Nico and David and Yugafod and Shafi to find out the incredible work that they're doing. Really concrete, barrier moving, sustainable work that looks at, again, I think the theme of our time together was ecosystem, that looks at all pieces of the puzzle to unlock the work, to ultimately then, in the end, make it lending to a refugee is like lending to anyone else. And that's where we want to get to. And so I just want to give a huge kudos to all three of you, Nico, David, and Shafi, for this incredibly hard work, and hope that everyone can learn more from you all, especially Nico's, call on me, let us know, we'll share learnings, and same for me in the donor space. If there are any donors on the line that want to learn more about investments in the space, please reach out. And thank you guys so much. And thank you, Abby, and all the folks working on the back end of Financial Inclusion Week to allow for a space to discuss this. So great talking to you guys.
Thank you so much, Barry. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Barry, Nicolas.